Undercover boss orders coffee at local diner, learns how easy it is to double waitress tips. Michael Foster, a 50-year-old CEO and founder of the famous breakfast restaurant chain, sat silently in a corner of the shop, his face reflecting a contemplative look. The light from the window shone on the steaming hot cup of coffee in front of him, its steam dissipating into the cold morning air. A young waitress approached, carrying a bill with a small tip and a hot cup of coffee. Her eyes lowered, her hands trembling, as if trying to hide a burden of worry. In that moment, a soft sigh like a passing breeze carried with it a heavy sense of suffocation. "This tip, it's not enough to pay my rent." Her voice cracked, as if even the gentlest touch could shatter her heart. Michael was stunned, the hot coffee in his hands suddenly tasting bitter. The rising steam fogged his old glasses, hiding the emotion in his eyes. Eyes that had once believed that this breakfast chain was a second home for every employee. Michael clenched his teeth, his eyes filled with determination. He whispered like an oath, "This cannot continue." Michael Foster stepped out of the hushed scene, his breath heavy, as if carrying with it the memories of a time when he considered this place a second home, not just for himself, but for all the people who had built the Sunrise Breakfast Joint brand with him. His voice rang out warm and filled with the emotion of someone who had devoted his youth to that brand. "I am Michael Foster, the founder of this famous breakfast restaurant chain. I have always believed that a restaurant does not just sell food, but also sells hope, a place where every employee can call it their second home." That statement echoed like a reminder to himself of what had once made him proud. The camera lens began to pan slowly, following Michael's footsteps, as he walked into the breakfast restaurant wearing a simple shirt and worn-out jeans, showing no signs of the powerful CEO who once appeared on the covers of business magazines. His steps were slow, but his eyes shone with a fierce determination, as if seeking the soul he had left behind in those days of chasing cold report numbers. The camera panned across every nook and cranny of the breakfast restaurant, the handwritten chalkboard menu, the wall clock stained by time, the porcelain plates with small scratches, the POS machine's soulless beep, like a dull heartbeat that had once blended with the laughter and voices of bright-eyed employees. The yellow light shone down, illuminating the familiar wooden table, each scratch on its surface like a scar from stories left untold. A young male employee, his hair slicked back neatly, stood next to the POS machine, his hand gliding over the screen, like someone controlling everything with just a few taps. The green light from the screen shone on his face, his eyes reflecting a cold look, the eyes of someone hiding something. Michael felt a chill run down his spine as he saw that look suddenly flash with an air of arrogance. By the pastry counter, a young waitress lowered her head, her shoulders trembling, her hands clutching the tray of bagels, as if holding on to the last bit of warmth left in this cold world. The yellow light shone on her eyes, revealing the deep, dark circles, traces of sleepless nights, slow shifts, and breakfasts that could not fill her empty stomach. Michael froze, his eyes fixed on the girl. Those eyes were the wake-up call he had needed. In that moment, memories of the past rushed back, the bright laughter, the proud smile, when she received her first tips, the shining eyes when a customer complimented the pastries. But now those smiles had faded. The camera panned quickly over every small detail, a coffee cup with a faint lipstick stain, the yellow light shining on a tablecloth faded by time, the faint smell of baked goods, but missing the warm scent of days gone by. The air in the shop was thick with something foreign, as if suffocated by lifeless numbers, averted gazes, and the cold beeping of the POS machine that Michael had once trusted as a symbol of transparency. Michael sighed. He slowly walked to the old wooden table, his hand gently gliding over its surface, as if soothing a wound in his own heart. His eyes scanned the breakfast shop, a place that had once been the home of dreams, now cold, like a financial report with no room left for human warmth. The yellow light fell on his face, highlighting every crow's foot at the corners of his eyes, the lines of years of sweat and tears, evidence of the nights he stayed up worrying about each employee, each loaf of bread, each hot cup of coffee. He sat down at the table, his back resting on the old wooden chair, his eyes distant but resolute. In that moment, he whispered to himself, his voice low and firm, "This is why I had to come back." Michael sat still on the old wooden chair, his breath catching in his chest. The clinking of a spoon against a cup rang out, mingling with the steady beeping of the POS machine, a familiar sound that had once made him proud of its transparency. But today, each beep echoed coldly, unfamiliar, like a bell calling out the shadows creeping beneath the brand he had once loved. He began to survey every corner of the shop, his eyes missing nothing. The gentle yellow light still shone on the pastry counter, where fresh loaves of bread still smelled warm, where he had once shared every small tip with his employees, where greetings and bright eyes had once been tokens of trust and humanity. But now Michael saw that everything had changed. Near the window area, a group of young employees chatted animatedly. A young male employee with slick-back hair and a confident gaze walked past the pastry counter with the ease of someone who acted like the real boss. Michael noticed he was scheduled during the busiest shifts when customers were plentiful and tips were high. The young man walked freely, his eyes sweeping the room as if every reward had already been decided for him. Each of his steps left behind the bitter truth something had changed, and it no longer bore the shape of fairness. In the opposite corner of the shop, the yellow light fell on Olivia's disheveled hair. The young waitress who once had eyes as bright as sunrise now lowered her head, her shoulders trembling, as she gathered the remaining plates on the table. Her hands lightly touched the tray of bagels, and a single tear rolled down, a small tear, but enough to erode Michael's trust. Her eyes flickered toward Michael's eyes that held all the things she didn't dare say aloud. That tear fell onto the tray, blending into the scent of bagels, leaving a blurred mark like the stain of injustice. Her eyes seemed to call out to Michael, asking, "Are you still here?" Michael heard soft laughter coming from the POS machine. A young male employee with short hair and a cunning glint in his eyes deftly moved his fingers across the screen as if it were a routine practiced 100 times. The faint green light from the screen reflected on his face, making his eyes look as cold as steel. Michael clenched his hand around the coffee cup, a sharp pain pricking at his chest. The yellow light shone on the boy's actions, tips being edited, disappearing as if they had never existed. The boy withdrew his hand and smirked with a hint of arrogance, as if pocketing something that didn't belong to him. Michael felt his heart tighten. Old memories played in his mind, himself in the past, holding a steaming latte in one hand, carefully dividing tips with the other, seeing their eyes shine like stars. He remembered Olivia's smile that day, when she received her first tip, slip, her eyes sparkling with faith in the home he had promised would always be her safe haven. But now that scene had shattered like a dropped cup. Every stolen tip was not just money, it was sweat, tears, and the hope of dedicated people. Michael felt his heart being squeezed. He looked at Olivia. She lowered her head, her eyes avoiding his gaze. Michael understood she was afraid that if she looked him in the eye, that tear would fall. But those eyes said it all. They were a silent, anguished question. Do you still believe in what you once promised? Michael remembered the old days when he personally signed off on every tip, distributing each dollar fairly, placing a hand on the staff's shoulders, calling them by their first names. He remembered their eyes when they received their tips, eyes filled with gratitude and pride. Now looking around, those eyes were gone. Instead, he saw coldness, suspicion, and fear. The POS machine beeped an all too familiar sound, but today it sounded like the scream of a soul in mourning. His eyes turned red, lit with the fire of pain and anger. He stared at the POS screen displaying the edited tip amount. That number was like a knife piercing his heart. His voice roared inside his chest, just one sentence, but carrying all the pain of a CEO who once believed in fairness. Did I let this happen? The yellow light shone down, illuminating the sweat on Michael's forehead. The POS machine beeped once more, beeped like the knock of truth, forbidding him to turn away. He knew that this very moment would decide everything. Because behind every beep were not just numbers, but the lives of the dreams and the people who had once put their trust in him. Under the pale yellow light, Michael leaned back on the old wooden chair. His breath caught in his throat. The steady beep of the POS machine continued, but now it echoed like a name call of betrayal, of sweat stolen away. Michael looked around the shop, his gaze sweeping over every corner, every worn wooden table, every pastry counter, every cup of coffee, things he had once believed were the fires that warmed this second home. In a far corner near the bread rack, Michael noticed another young employee, his hair a bit long, his eyes darting around. He stood hesitantly, his hands trembling as he looked at the POS screen. He had just taken over Olivia's shift, and it was his own hand that had adjusted the tips just a second earlier. In his eyes, Michael saw a mix of fear and regret, as if the boy himself didn't understand that every stolen tip meant robbing someone of their hope. Michael took a deep breath, his breath catching in his chest. Another memory hit him, the image of this boy, in his early days, his eyes bright, whenever Michael taught him how to divide tips, how to make the perfect latte, how to listen to a customer's story. Michael remembered those eyes full of dreams. But today, those eyes were no longer clear. They were filled with confusion, as if lost in a maze of deceit. At the pastry counter, Olivia still lowered her head to wipe the tray, her eyes revealing deep despair, as if all the promises from long ago had vanished with the early morning air. Michael saw her hands trembling as if a single light breeze could blow away all the trust she had left. The yellow light fell on her hair, revealing every tangled strand from long shifts from sleepless nights, waiting for the end-of-day tips she had deserved. Michael's gaze stopped at the POS machine, its faint green screen still glowing, stabbing straight into his heart. The adjusted tip amount still glared back at him like an unstitched wound. He remembered the day he signed the contract to install the POS system, the day he believed technology would bring fairness. But now it had become just a tool for cheaters to turn someone else's sweat into their own reward. Michael lowered his head, his voice like the wind whistling through a cracked door. After all these years building this brand, is this how it's going to end? His breath trembled, but his eyes burned bright. From deep within those eyes, a fire rose, a fire of a man who had once started from the bottom, sprinkling butter and milk on bread, who had once shared every dollar in tips with employees like sharing hope. His gaze swept across the other employees, those he had once considered family. A young female employee with short hair, her eyes filled with confusion, stood clutching a coffee cup, trembling as if waiting for a miracle. Michael remembered her bright laughter when customers praised the bread. Now that smile was gone. Only coldness and suspicion remained. He saw it, and his heart ached. Another young male employee, tall and thin, leaned against the pastry counter, his eyes looking at Michael like a silent plea. "Boss, please don't let everything crumble into dust." Michael heard that call in his heart like a voice from the very first days he had built this brand. The POS machine beeped again. Beep, that sound was like a hammer, striking against the walls of deceit. Michael stared at the screen, the green light reflecting on his face. Every wrinkle stood out, traces of long nights spent worrying over this brand. His eyes glowed bright, and his voice burst out, each word seemingly carved from his heart. It's time for justice to speak. His hand clenched the handle of the coffee cup, the warmth seeping through his sleeve, reminding him of the early mornings when he stood behind the counter, sharing stories with employees. Now, in this thick air of suspicion, he knew this very moment would decide whether the brand would keep its soul or not. His eyes landed on Olivia. Those eyes that tear were the very reason he couldn't turn his back. Michael nodded to her like a silent vow. "I will do everything to reclaim justice." The POS machine beeped again, beeped, that sound like a wake-up bell, rousing all the hopes that had been sleeping in this room. Michael stood upright, his shoulders trembling, but his eyes burned with determination. He knew this was no longer just about a few dollars of tips. It was about trust, about fairness, about the warmth that Sunrise Breakfast Joint once had. He told himself, that warmth cannot be stolen. Not while I'm still here. The yellow light shone down the POS machine, beeped again, beeped like a promise to all the unfinished dreams in this breakfast shop. Michael clenched his teeth, his voice low but firm. This cannot end like this. Michael stood up. The old wooden chair creaked, echoing like an alarm, making the entire breakfast shop fall silent. The yellow light shone on his face, the face of a man who had once called this place a second home. That face was now lined with wrinkles from sleepless nights, from the years he had poured his heart into building this brand. He took a deep breath, his breath burning away all doubt. His voice rang out strong yet warm, each word etched into the very bricks of the shop. "I am Michael Foster, the founder of this breakfast shop chain." Every eye turned to him as if waiting for that voice to rise. The manager stood frozen, his hands still on the POS machine, his eyes darting around looking for an escape. A young male employee swallowed hard, his eyes blazing, as if he had found something that had been buried long ago. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a stack of papers with frayed edges, undeniable evidence, the sweat and tears of countless people who had put their faith in this place. He raised the papers high, the yellow light highlighting the bold black letters, edited tips, unfair shift schedules, threatening messages to staff. Each sheet was like a knife carving into the conscience of the betrayer. The POS machine beep beep, that sound echoing like the scream of a truth being exposed. Michael turned to face the manager, his eyes as sharp as a blade, as if to pierce through all the fake masks. The manager bowed his head, his shoulders trembling, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple, like guilt dripping onto his pale face. Michael looked around. The light swept over every staff member. The yellow light shone on their tired faces, each pair of eyes searching for one last ray of hope. And then he stopped at Olivia. She stood there, the tray of bagels trembling in her hands, her eyes shining bright with tears. The yellow light cast down, making her eyes gleam like a gem in the night, holding the hope, holding the trust that she had kindled from the very first day she set foot in the shop. Michael's voice was firm, each word as sharp as a hammer, striking down the walls of deceit. "This is your sweat and tears stolen by these very managers. From today, every tip must be given to those who truly deserve it." The POS machine beeped again. This time it sounded like a bell ringing out the truth, waking every sleeping heart. Every staff member's eyes lit up like a fire blazing in the darkness. Olivia gently wiped away a tear, her eyes gleaming with a trust that had long been buried under layers of doubt. Michael stood tall, his eyes blazing with determination, his chest swelling as if waiting to be freed from the heavy days. The yellow light shone down, reflecting off each bead of sweat on his forehead. The sweat of a man who once shared every tip, every tear with his staff, and shed his own tears when he signed the certificate that founded this brand. Olivia's eyes shone the light of faith reborn. The POS machine beeped again, beeped like the bell of justice, like a voice confirming sunrise. Breakfast joint is still a second home. Olivia stood behind the bagel counter in a simple white shirt, but glowing with the pride of someone who had been vindicated and given back the right to own her trust. Her smile lit up the entire room, the yellow light shining down, reflecting in her eyes like the morning star. The eyes of someone who once cried over stolen tips, now a symbol of resilience and fairness. The new POS system was upgraded its screen, clearly displaying every tip transparent fair so that no one could secretly steal the sweat of those who sacrificed their sleep, their small wages, their tears to keep this restaurant alive. The camera panned to Olivia guiding the new staff, her hands moving deftly, her voice warm and firm. A young girl, her eyes still red, listened as Olivia explained how to divide tips, and her eyes glistened with trust. The yellow light from the lamp shone down, gathering all the warmth from the early days, shining on Olivia's face where justice had finally been restored. In the corner of the counter, Michael stood silently watching Olivia, his eyes shining with pride that was hard to hide. He knew success had never been measured by sales reports or the number of seats sold each morning. True success lay in the bright eyes of trust and the sincere smiles of those who had built this brand with their own hearts. He remembered the first day Olivia walked into the shop. Her eyes were clear, then her hands trembling as she made her first coffee for a customer. And now her eyes were still clear but no longer afraid, only confident as someone who had been given justice. Michael took a deep breath, his heart throbbing as if it had been reborn after so many sleepless nights. Michael walked slowly towards Olivia, his shoes lightly touching the tiled floor, making a faint creak amid the lively sound of coffee machines rhythmically steaming. The yellow light shone on his forehead, revealing lines of fatigue but also resilience. He remembered the early days of opening the shop when it was just him and a few young employees' mornings, filled with the smell of butter and milk and cheerful laughter. But now Olivia stood in the very position he had always hoped a manager would hold a position, not just about scheduling shifts or tapping the POS machine, but one that connected trust and upheld values. The glow from the new POS screen sparkled like a witness to a system rebuilt, a system Michael had once trusted absolutely, now finally finding its soul again. He looked at the young woman Olivia was guiding. Her eyes shone with trust, no longer the eyes of resignation, no longer tears rolling down her cheeks, like in the old days. The yellow light illuminated Olivia's face, highlighting her resolute gaze. Michael saw in it not just trust, but also a promise. I will keep this flame alive for you. Beside the counter, a group of other employees stood in line to receive their new shift schedules, their eyes no longer afraid, but instead peaceful and hopeful. Michael listened to their small talk. I got all my tips today. This weekend, I'll have enough to buy books for my kid. Each word was like a symphony of renewal echoing in his heart. Michael turned to look at the chair where he used to sit. A cup of coffee still steamed its aroma, a scent that reminded him of the early days when he personally brewed each cup, placed each pastry on a plate, made his eyes sting. He clenched his fist lightly, whispering to himself, "This is what I've always wanted, a home where every employee can be proud to call it by name." The yellow light spilled over the pastry counter, highlighting every bead of sweat from the employees who had built this brand. Michael felt his chest heavy but also filled with pride. He knew success was not the number on a report. It was the bright eyes when justice was called by name, the smiles of those who once thought they'd never be heard. A male employee approached, holding the new shift schedule, his eyes gleaming. "Thank you, Mr. Michael. I didn't think I could stay here if nothing changed." Michael placed a hand on his shoulder, nodding slowly. "We all have a responsibility to protect this home. You're not just an employee, you're part of the flame that lit up Sunrise Breakfast Joint." The yellow light revealed Olivia's smile as she turned to the young employee. "Don't forget to share tips fairly for tonight's shifts." Her voice was gentle but firm, just like Michael's in the past, strong, straightforward, and full of love. Michael whispered to himself, one tear changed an entire system. And that was why he had always believed that Sunrise Breakfast Joint didn't just sell bagels and coffee, it sold hope, trust, and human kindness. He knew he had found again the second home he had cherished in his heart. And that yellow light, the light of faith, would continue to shine brightly because the people here had dared to stand up, dared to demand justice, dared to turn their tears into a flame that would light the way for generations to come. If you believe that justice is not just dry numbers, but every smile, every bead of sweat, every shining eye, please share this video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the real stories of justice, where every voice is heard.